passionate to beat somebody. We're passionate to beat everybody.
My expectation is we go out and dominate and create a nightmare and make people never want to play you again.
If you are a fan of another team and your coach is not out there doing everything that Kirby Smart is doing right now, you are already losing. You feel however you want to feel about that.
Nowhere to run and nowhere to hide for 4 quarters. They got to see us in our house for 4 quarters. They got to look us in the eye for 4. This is about us and our family and our house. This is about us. This is our mentality. We ain't backing down. We ain't running. Set a tone, send a message. This is our house. Physical toughness wins in football now. And if you in this room, you got it. If you come in here, you better believe in it. Because this physical toughness, it's what makes the difference. Elite focus. That's all I do to the guy across from me. I'm fixing to whip his ass. Not in my box, not today. It's about us. It's about our family. We attack. You take that helmet and you strike them. And you strike them and you strike them. That's how you get respect. Physically, I will break them.
The Georgia Bulldogs are overhyped. Or are they about to show the rest of college football exactly what the hype is all about? That's what we're going to talk about tonight on the How About That Dogs cast. When you look at Georgia's schedule, everybody knows that it is not going to be a walk in the park. From beginning to end, there are challenging games across the schedule with their hardest games coming on the road. Any other team that is not the consensus #1 team in college football, well, they might have a really hard time with that. But these Georgia Bulldogs, if there's any team that can make it through, then this is the one that's going to be able to get it done. Look at this schedule. We start with Clemson, Kentucky on the road, Alabama on the road. Then they have back-to-back home games with Auburn and Mississippi State. Then on the road again to play the team most people think is the primary rival to the Dogs this year in the SEC, the Texas Longhorns. The neutral site game against the Florida Gators. Then on the road to take on a much improved Ole Miss team. Then Tennessee riding high on all their hopes of a new quarterback and Heupel's most talented team yet. They think they're going to come into Athens and provide the Dogs a challenge. You have an out-of-conference game, and then you finish up with the Yellow Jackets of Georgia Tech, and we just saw what Brent Key's team is made up of this season, with a win that they had over Florida State in week 0. No doubt, this is a challenging schedule. But like I said, if any team is going to be able to navigate it, you would think it would be the consensus #1 overall team in the country, the Georgia Bulldogs. Well, what we're going to do is walk through this entire thing, and we're going to make sure that we lay it out for you exactly how we feel it's going to go. And there's no better place to start than at the beginning. That would be the Clemson Tigers taking on the Georgia Bulldogs in Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta to open the season. Now, this is not the same Clemson team that it was just a handful of years ago, and there are a lot of reasons about why that. When you used to think of the Clemson Tigers over the last decade, you thought of explosive offense. You thought of a team that could push the ball down the field with great quarterback play. They could hurt you from the running back position, and they had the ability to play really stout defense. That defensive line put player after player into the league. There was absolutely no doubt that Clemson was going to give you everything you wanted if you had to line up against them during their heyday. The thing about the Clemson Tigers is that they are not now what they once were. And there are a lot of reasons for that. There are a lot of reasons because It could be recruiting. It could be the transfer portal. It could be bad coaching hires. But I think it's an amalgamation of it all. I think they've come together to be the team that we see now, which is a team that is not what it was a few years ago. They still have talented players. Cade Klubnik, much maligned, but he was a 5-star prospect out of Texas. Never lost a game in high school. Barrett Carter, All-American linebacker. Peter Woods, TJ Parker. They still have players, but they're not the same team that they were. At the end of the day, when I look at this Clemson game, I don't think it's that complicated. We know that Georgia should have the better roster here. Based on recent reports, others agree with that fact. But it isn't just about the players here. It's about depth. It's about the coaching staff. It's about exactly where Georgia is in relation to Clemson. Not necessarily where Clemson is in relation to Georgia. What do I mean by that? I just mean that across every phase of the game, once the game starts to play out, I think that the Georgia Bulldogs are going to show why they're the number one team in the country on Saturday against Clemson. Now, I'm not like a lot of people. I don't necessarily believe this is going to be a blowout. But I think that Georgia is going to show that they are the better team. I think the Dogs win. I actually think they cover. But I don't think it's going to get into like a boat race situation. I don't think they're going to blow the doors off of Clemson. They could. The potential is there because you look at what Clemson's doing right now coming into this game. They know they need to be more explosive on offense. And everyone thinks that they're going to be pretty good on defense. But when it comes down, the biggest deal is offensive line versus defensive line and the inverse for both teams. Georgia has one of the best offensive lines in the country. Clemson traditionally has, and they have players on that side of the ball. But why is Peter Woods at over 300 pounds going to bump outside and play defensive end when he played along the interior last year? That seems a little heavy. Is he doing that because they don't have anybody else that can play that defensive end position? He's their best option and they're counting on those young guys to really get the job done inside? Or is it really that Clemson's better than we think they are? I'm not certain about that. But I do think that Clemson's going to keep it closer than a lot of people think they will. I'm going to go with a number of 31-17 Dogs win. But if it were a little bit tighter than that, it wouldn't surprise me in the least if the Dogs blew them out, because depth is a real concern for Clemson, because Clemson has injury in the secondaries. They have to start true freshmen back there, or those true freshmen have to play a lot. The Dogs could really take advantage of that. I think at the end of the day, this game could be a blowout, but I just don't feel comfortable saying that that's my prediction. So I'm going to go with the number of 31-17. Georgia beats Clemson to open the season. Now, when we look at the schedule, there are a couple of other teams on here that we're not really going to spend a lot of time talking about tonight. That would be Tennessee Tech and UMass. Now, those games, I expect Georgia to win by whatever number they want to win by. So we're not going to spend our time on that. We're going to go ahead and look ahead to Kentucky. The Kentucky Wildcats. Now, that's the team that everybody every year seems to want to bump up a little bit and say, look out, Georgia, Kentucky could get you this year. This is the year that Kentucky's going to put it together. Now, if you've watched other videos on this channel, you know that I actually feel, I respect Kentucky. I think that they're going to be good this year, and I think that that defense is going to be better than a lot of people believes it will. They seem to think that they have the best collection of wide receivers that they may have ever had. Now, I don't follow Kentucky that closely. I can't say whether or not that's accurate. But I know I've seen enough from that defense to know that they're going to be good enough to keep Kentucky in games. And if Brock Vandagriff, the former Georgia Bulldog and the new Kentucky Wildcat, can make a few plays along with what they believe is a good wide receiver core, then Kentucky's going to be dangerous when the Dogs have to travel to Lexington to play them in week 3. At the end of the day, Kentucky's going to fight hard, but they are essentially a lesser version of what Georgia is. They want to be what Georgia is, but they don't have the depth and the talent along the roster, top to bottom, that the Dogs do. So if Georgia doesn't beat itself, I think they go up there and they handle business against Kentucky. And at that point, they're going to be looking at 3-0, which sets the table for what I believe is the biggest game in the conference this year and possibly the biggest game in college football. It's certainly the one that everybody out here is going to be paying attention to, going to be looking at, and going to make sure that they are free to watch. And that would be Georgia traveling to play Alabama in Tuscaloosa. This game means a lot, and I've had a lot to say about it up to this point. A quick recap of how I feel is, it doesn't matter that Georgia's 3-0. It doesn't matter that Alabama has a new head coach. It doesn't matter that they lost a lot of players in the portal. This game is going to be blown up, inflated by the national media to a level that maybe we haven't seen that often here recently. It's going to be framed in such a way that if Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs go to Tuscaloosa and lose yet again, maybe they are not what we all believe that they are. There will be people that say that. Regardless of the 12th team playoff and the idea that you might lose a game and your season's not over, for a lot of people, this is a must-win game for Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, I don't necessarily think I would call it a must-win game, but I would be lying to you if I said that every player on that team, every coach, and every Georgia Bulldog fan doesn't understand what a big game this is and what it means to the program and what it means nationally. Not only is it another game along the road to what you hope to accomplish over the course of the season, but this is the only team that has managed to beat the Georgia Bulldogs over the last 3 seasons. That's a little something that sticks in the craw of every Bulldog I know, and it doesn't matter why or how it happened. What matters is that it did happen. What matters is that at the end of the day, Alabama got the W over Georgia when they played in the SEC championship game the last 2 times. So this is a big one. Everybody's going to be watching it. And a lot of people wonder, when you look at what this game means over the course of the season to Georgia in terms of both their conference title hopes and their college football playoff hopes. Well, obviously, if you lose one game, you're not knocked out of those discussions. But this is the kind of game that if you win it, is as much a statement game as it is a positive number in the win column. Like, it's more than just a game. Now, as fans, we can build it up to be all we want it to be. The Alabama people certainly believe that Georgia really doesn't have a shot, that just because they've beaten Georgia the last 2 times, they're going to beat Georgia again. At least the ones I talk to. Now, the more rational among them will say, Georgia could win this game. They're talented. Georgia's the favorite in the league. But deep down, I got to believe that they believe that those prior results are actually going to matter. I don't feel that way. I do not believe that those previous meetings have anything to do with this meeting. And when these 2 teams line it up, the same thing that determined those past 2 meetings are going to determine this meeting. That would be the play along the lines of scrimmage and who can make the 1 or 2 plays over the course of the game that will determine the outcome. In those previous meetings, hats off to Alabama, they did that. They won along the lines of scrimmage. And when they needed a break or when they needed to make a play, they did. The ball bounced their way. Georgia turned the football over. And the score that resulted from that turnover wound up being the difference in the game. It's just a handful of plays. We can make it as big as we want. But I think if the players and coaches are being honest, they would tell you that this one matters. So how do I see it going? I think the Dogs go to Tuscaloosa and beat the Alabama Crimson Tide to improve to 4-0 on the year. It's going to be a hard-fought game. It's going to be close, even with everything that's happened at Alabama. Tuscaloosa is a tough place to win. But I believe this team is good enough and has the right intangibles about them, the right mindset to go over there and make it happen. We'll get into breaking it down just exactly how I think that's going to happen when the game comes. But for now, I'm on the Dogs. Georgia, 4-0 as they move on throughout the season. That brings us to Auburn. It's funny how the schedule did that. We get both Alabama and Auburn back-to-back. That's fine. There's plenty of dislike there, especially when it comes to Auburn. Georgia and Dog Nation will be up and ready to welcome the Tigers back into Sanford Stadium. Now, there are a lot of people that look at Auburn and they think that this is a year that they're really going to move. They think this is going to be the year that they step forward and move up inside the conference rankings and improve their team. I don't agree with that. Now, there are good big voices out there like Cole Kubelik, Auburn insider. He should know better than I. He seems to think that Auburn's going to be pretty good. He seems to think that if things come together, they could really make some strides here in year two. I think that if Auburn's lucky, they're going to get to 6-6. If they're lucky, I peg them as my underachiever in the conference this year because everybody seems to think they're going to make that move. I seem to think they're going to go the other way. I think the Dogs win, and they get to 5-0. And then Mississippi State comes to town. Now, let's be honest here. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this game. Not because I don't respect Mississippi State and Jeff Levy. I do. Over the years, I've been under root for Mississippi State against certain teams like the Gators. But this squad, given everything they had to do in the offseason, overhauling the entire program with a new coach, they just aren't going to have the horses to come into Athens and really stress the Dogs on this Saturday. Georgia gets the win, and they improve to 6-0. That brings us to the Texas Longhorns. Seemingly the most flashy new addition to the conference, now that the teams count 16 inside the Southeastern Conference. Oklahoma came with them, but everybody seems to want to talk about Texas because everything's bigger in Texas, including the expectations among their fan base. When the season started, well, even before that, go back to SEC Media Days. Sitting in Dallas, I was asked to vote. Who do I think is going to represent the other side, if you will, because I thought Georgia was going to get to Atlanta to play in the SEC championship game. Who is going to represent the other side, the challenger to Georgia, in the SEC championship game? Now, this was back in July, so things have changed since then, including my opinions. At that time, I thought Texas would be that team that was going to be in Atlanta to play Georgia in the SEC championship game. Given the benefit of the passage of time and good reporting out of the Lone Star State, we now know that, at least from what I hear, Texas has real questions about who's going to replace those two NFL players that they lost off the defensive line from last year's team. They're going to have good players there. They're going to have serviceable players, but are they going to have the kind of players that made the impact that those guys made for Texas last year? From what I'm hearing, they're not so sure. They have great skill at Texas. And part of that was the running backs that they expected to have back in July. But now we know those guys aren't going to be there. Texas has since lost 2 running backs, their starter to a season-ending knee injury. This is not the same Texas team that I was thinking about back in July. I thought in July that Georgia was going to go to Austin as they made their way through this bear of a schedule. And given the hype and the hornet's nest that Austin was going to be, when the Dogs rolled in there, probably still ranked number 1 at the time, I thought this would be the spot. If Georgia was going to get nicked, this is it. And I thought Texas was going to beat Georgia. I don't feel that way anymore. Texas is already depleted due to injury. They already have questions at a key position that really matters inside the Southeastern Conference. The things I've heard about Georgia over that same period of time have led me to feel even stronger about the questions that I had about the Dogs when I made that original selection. I've come around to the point now that I think Georgia goes to Austin and beats the Texas Longhorns. I think it's going to be a good game. Somewhere in the neighborhood of a 10-point victory for the Dogs. That's how I think it's going to shake out. Let's say 31-21. Georgia remains undefeated, sitting at 7-0, as they make their way to Jacksonville for the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. That's what I'm always going to call it. And the Dogs are going to take on what could still be Billy Napier's Florida Gators. We'll see how the season shakes out for the Gators. They've got a rough ride on the schedule side of things too. But regardless of whether Billy's there or not, I think Georgia wins this game. Now, Florida is no pushover. They have talent on that roster. Billy seems to think that they're really making strides, and if they had any other schedule than the one that they have that's most brutal right now, that they could potentially sneak their way into the college football playoff. He said as much. His players have said as much. I can't go that far. Like I said, I'm not even certain Billy's still going to be the head coach by the time the Gators get to Jacksonville. But even if he is, I don't think it matters. The Dogs beat the Gators, remain undefeated at 8-0 with 4 games left in the 2024 season. And next up, on the challenging matchups that Georgia has on the road this year, they travel to the Grove to play the Ole Miss Rebels. Now, when I looked at this game to start the season, I thought, yep, Georgia's got a really challenging schedule, especially now that Ole Miss has leveled up their talent across the board, utilized the transfer portal to the way that they needed to fill the holes that they had on that team. But I thought the way Georgia handled them in Athens last season, yes, I know it's a different team, but can you do enough in the transfer portal in one offseason to make up that difference, that gap that was on display in Sanford Stadium last year? I don't know. I didn't think so. But now as I look across the schedule, and I look at what Georgia has had to do to get to this point, my football brain tells me that regardless of how good Georgia is, at some point, it's not going to go your way. And now, I think if I've got to pick a place that Georgia drops a game, it's here. I think the Dogs lose on the road at Ole Miss. I know, I can't believe I'm saying it either. That is not what I thought I would have said just 2 months ago. Don't misunderstand me. The Dogs could 100% go undefeated. But over the course of the year, playing games like this one after the other, even the very best teams get worn down, the ball doesn't bounce your way. Something happens. Sometimes you just get beat. I think Georgia loses at Ole Miss to drop them to 8-1 on the season. I think it's a cumulative effect. I think if there's anywhere that you might have a letdown, and I know that Kirby's teams don't let down, but they're human. And if it happens, I think this is the spot that might get Georgia. That leads us to Tennessee the next week at Sanford Stadium. After what I think is going to be a loss at Ole Miss, Tennessee is going to have their work cut out for them. I know they think that this is the year that they're going to step up and bite Georgia, but much like what I just said about Ole Miss, the gap that we've seen on display between the two teams, Georgia and Tennessee, over the last few years, is not a small gap. Both in talent, coaching, and results on the field. And you've got a team that just came off a loss. I think all that spells bad news for Tennessee, who's going to come in there with a first-year starter. I think everything spins up wrong for the Volunteers here. The Dogs get the W and improve to 9-1. Then they'll take on UMass. That gets them to 10-1. And they will end the year against the Ramblin' Wreck from Georgia Tech in Athens. Now, we just saw that this Brent Key team is improving. We just saw it on display against Florida State. Georgia fans saw it firsthand last year when we saw that Haynes King was a threat to run. We saw that he can be a good passer as well. We saw that he has weapons to get the ball to. This Georgia Tech team finally is a respectable opponent again here in the state of Georgia for the Dogs. I like that team. I picked them to beat Florida State. Thanks, Brent. But with all that said, Kirby Smart and this team staring at a potential berth in the SEC championship game, staring at a berth at the college football playoff, they're not going to lose to Georgia Tech. Kirby's not going to lose to Georgia Tech. They're going to handle Georgia Tech to finish the season 11-1. So yes, the schedule, very, very tough. It's going to take some twists and some turns along the way. Georgia will be challenged. They will be challenged early and often, and they will be better for it come the end of the year. As I said, they can absolutely go undefeated. They are talented enough, I believe, that they have the right mental makeup to do it. But the odds are against it. There's only one team in the history of the Southeastern Conference that has gone undefeated in the regular season 3 consecutive years. That is this Kirby Smart team. It seems unthinkable that they could do it a 4th year. At some point, you have to think that the ball's not going to bounce their way. They're just going to be off. They're just not going to have a great day. You could probably pick Alabama, Texas, or Ole Miss like me. Maybe even Tennessee. You could probably point to those games and say, that's the one I think they're going to lose. And you would probably be just as apt to be correct as I am about picking them to lose at Ole Miss. The odds are just against it that they're going to be able to go undefeated again. But I was this close to doing it anyway. I said to myself, am I really going to do this? Am I going to pick Georgia to go undefeated? Am I really going to do this? And at the end of the day, I couldn't do it. My football brain wouldn't let me. Just wouldn't let me. So there you have it. Georgia goes 11-1 over the course of the regular season, and I think they're going to play Ole Miss in Atlanta in the SEC championship game. I get there just by looking across the schedules. I think Ole Miss is probably only going to lose one game, and that's going to be at LSU. I think they will just outclass everybody else with the talent that they've brought in. And I think Lane Kiffin gets the Rebels to Atlanta for the first time. And I think that the Georgia Bulldogs exact their revenge, beat Lane Kiffin's Ole Miss Rebels in Atlanta to be the SEC champions here in 2024. And in doing so, will claim the number 1 seed headed into the college football playoff. So there you have it. That's my season predictions, game by game, for this year's Georgia Bulldogs. But that's not all I've got to say. There are a couple other things I wanted to offer to you fellas and ladies while we were here this evening, and that is a few bold takes, a few wild predictions. I think that as good as Georgia is, or we expect them to be, along the offensive and defensive sides of the ball, the area that people seem to forget about is just how dominant I expect them to be in the games on special teams. Both kicking the ball, punting, but also in the return game. So, my first bold prediction is that this year, Anthony Evans will have at least one punt return for touchdown. Now, you might say, that's not that bold, Randy. It actually is. Over the last handful of years, Georgia has not been very productive in terms of impact plays, chunk plays in the return game, and especially in terms of taking it to the end zone. But I think Evans is the guy who's going to be able to make that happen for Georgia this year. And like I said, I think he gets at least one. I think there's a very real possibility that there could be more touchdowns in the return game for the Dogs. But my first bold prediction is Anthony Evans. I'm looking forward to it. And I'm also looking forward to seeing him break out in the pass game this year. I think he's going to become one of those guys that can work in space, that can really do some work over the middle, and especially on third down for the Dogs. So I'm really looking forward to Anthony's season. I think he's going to have a nice year. Bold prediction number 2 has to do with a guy that everybody seems to know everything about and have an opinion on. Carson Beck. What exactly am I going to do that's going to be a bold prediction about number 15? Well, we know that in his first year as a starter, Carson completed over 72% of his passes. And he did so while throwing the football down the field, averaging over 9 yards per play. So Carson wasn't dinking and dunking. He earned that percentage. He's very accurate with the football. Because of the way last season played out with the absence of Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey due to injury and things like that, in the first half of the season when they sort of held the reins on Carson Beck because we didn't have the running back situation sorted out the way we wanted to, and they really wanted to protect the football and play the game a different way. At the end of the season, Carson wound up being just a little bit short of 4,000 yards, and he was under 30 touchdowns last year. My big prediction this year is that Carson Beck is going to yet again finish with a 70% completion rate over the course of the season. That's the first part of it. And the second part is that he's going to not just eclipse 30 touchdowns, but he's going to get 35 plus passing touchdowns this year. So I think Carson gets better than he was last year. That's due in part to the fact that I think the running game is going to be better. I think that the offensive line is going to be about what it was last year, if not better. And I expect him, with another year in the system and now the advantages of having the microphone in his helmet for pre-snap communication, as well as having video on the sidelines to dissect what he sees on the field, from a bird's eye view in real time. I think all those things, his second year in the system with Coach Bobo, just his maturity, I think Carson Beck is in for an even better year than he had last year. For a cherry on top, we could probably just add the fact that he gets over 4,000 yards this year in passing to this prediction. I'm fine with that. Let's go ahead and do it. 35 plus touchdowns, 70% completion percentage, and over 4,000 yards passing for Carson Beck this year. Big numbers, no doubt, but I think everything lays out for him that he can pull that off this season. So where am I going next? 2 down. Here's number 3. Michael Williams, or Captain Chaos, as I like to call him, is primed for a big year, but he's not alone. Given what Georgia has on the second level of that defense this year, and given that we saw last year they were not explosive along the interior defensive line when it came to getting after the quarterback, and given the way Georgia is looking at the players that they have and how they can best put them in position to be successful, meaning that they're going to move Michael Williams around and let him play in a 2-point stance a little bit more. Maybe move him from the outside to the inside and let him pick his matchup in any given week or scenario. I think the coaches are going to put Michael Williams as well as Jalen Walker and Damon Wilson in position to make big plays behind the line of scrimmage for the Dogs this year, time and again. So my big prediction is that not only Michael Williams, but Damon Wilson and Jalen Walker will all have 3+ sacks this year. When you look at what Georgia did statistically in terms of sacks last season, this is indeed a bold take. So it's not just going to be Mike Hill, because everyone's going to know about him and they're going to focus on him. But I think you're going to see those other guys come through too. And instead of having one guy with 10 or 15 sacks, I think you're going to see several guys for Georgia that have 3 or more. But the 3 I'm going to name will be Williams, Wilson, and Walker. Oh, that sounds like a law firm. That's pretty good. So that's my third big take. And here we go for the final one. Branson Robinson looks like he's going to get the start for the Dogs against Clemson on Saturday. And it could be the kickoff to what could be a fantastic comeback story, comeback player of the year level story for Branson Robinson. But this prediction doesn't deal only with him. I used him and I wanted to start with him to sort of prime the table and let you know that Georgia's running game is going to be better. And to start the year, the face of it's going to be Branson Robinson, most people think. I think by the time we get to the end of the year, you're going to have 3 Georgia running backs that get at least 400+ yards on the ground this season. Again, when you hear that number, you might think that's nothing. But just look over the last handful of seasons for Georgia. The way the carries have shaken out, they've wound up with the top back somewhere around 800 yards, the second leading rusher about 150 yards behind them, and then there's a big drop-off. I think this year you're going to have 3 Georgia running backs, each with 400+ yards carrying the rock. I think you're still going to have your lead back who's going to get 800, maybe even 1,000 yards. And you're probably going to have that second back who's going to be 100, 150 yards, maybe 200 yards behind him. But that puts him in the range of 700 to 800 yards. And I think this group is deep enough and talented enough to have a third back get over 400 yards because they demand to be on the field because of their skill set, one. And two, thanks to injury and or suspension, like what we're seeing here in this first game, you're going to have backs have the opportunity to get more carries than maybe they would otherwise in different portions of the season. So I think Georgia has 3 running backs that get over 400 yards this year, and they may combine to finish with 1,500, 1,800 yards between them. If they do that, and then you tie that to everything else I just said about Carson Beck, then 11-1 and champions of the Southeastern Conference starts to really come into focus if you are a Georgia Bulldog fan. So that's it. That's my look at the 2024 Georgia Bulldog season. I predict them to go 11-1. I predict them to lose on the road to Mississippi, but then exact their revenge against the Rebels in Atlanta in the SEC championship game and get crowned as SEC champions here in 2024. You guys are the real champions. And that's why I want to let you know that we don't only do the video podcast here on YouTube, it also exists as an audio podcast. So be sure to head on over to Apple or Spotify, review, leave us a 5-star rating if you will, and then download the episodes over there, stick them in your back pocket, and take us with you everywhere you go so you don't miss anything we're doing here on the How About That from DawgsCast. We're still on the march to 10K here on YouTube, so please tell a friend. If you think we're doing a good job, let them know. The very best thing you can do to support us here on the channel is to make sure you're subscribed and notifications are turned on so that you never miss anything we're doing over here. We're cranking up the content machine. We've got more and new content coming out for you all the time. Go ahead and jump on in the boat. It costs you nothing and it helps me out tremendously. We appreciate you being here. One of those new shows that we have here on the channel is the SEC Powers Hour. We don't do it all year round. We just do it in the fall here when we have games to pick. My brother Show comes on here and we go through all the SEC games and we give you winners and losers for every game every week. It's a good time. We have a blast. We do that at 7 p.m. on Thursday nights. So come on over and be a part of it. Looking forward to the show tomorrow night as we kick off the season here in the Southeastern Conference. And of course, I want to say thank you to our channel members. We could not do this without the support of you guys who choose to step up your level of support for what we do. We appreciate you and we thank you for being here. So there you have it. This is another fun week, another fun walk through the SEC. Football's back, and I'm excited for it. I did pick Georgia Tech right, so at least for now, I'm 1-0. And as we head into the rest of the season, if Georgia ends up going 11-1 the way I think they will, regardless of where that loss comes, it's going to be a great season for the Dogs because that's probably going to put them back in Atlanta with a chance to win another championship. And that is always a good thing. Until next time, y'all take care of yourselves, take care of your friends, your families, take care of each other. And go Dogs! Whee! All right, everybody, thank you so much for being in here with me. I hope the audio has been all right tonight. I hear something, and I don't know if you guys can hear it too, but I hope the show went okay. And I see everybody who's in the chat here with us tonight. I appreciate you being here. This is our overtime period where we just bandy around whatever pops into our brains, and I give you guys some thoughts that I may have forgotten. And one, I can see right now that one thing I forgot to mention during the show, and this is a statistic that is going to make you shake your head. Like you're not going to believe it. If Georgia beats Clemson Saturday, it will be their 40th straight regular season victory. That will be the longest streak in college football history since the Oklahoma Sooners pulled off something similar back in the 1950s. 40 consecutive regular season games. Any way you cut it, that is impressive. So here's hoping, if for no other reason, then that's one more feather in the cap for Kirby and the Dawgs this Saturday. I hope they get that win just so we can say 40 consecutive regular season victories. That is really nice. I see my buddy Dr. Gonzo's in here. JG's in here. Tim, as always, is in here. Good to see you. Herb and Raj, glad you could make it. Astro QTV. I don't know. I've seen you in here, man. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate you commenting. That's great. The show is always better when we have people in the comments here because it keeps things moving along and helps me focus. I appreciate you guys being here with me. I see a couple of you think we're going undefeated. Like I said, I absolutely believe Georgia can go undefeated. I almost was going to come on here and say, yes, Georgia goes undefeated again for the 4th consecutive regular season. But I thought there are already too many people out there who think all I do is say positive things about Georgia, which is not true, by the way. But that's what they think. I'm like, if I step up here and I say, yep, Georgia's going to go undefeated, 12-0, they might just completely throw me out with the bathwater and not take me seriously. I just felt like that would be too much to say. And at the end of the day, like I said, my brain just wouldn't let me say they would go 12-0 again. Like, there are just too many things that can happen. Injury, the ball bounces funny. You just get worn down. Or maybe another team just happens to play better than you that day, regardless of how good you are. Maybe, you turn the ball over once or twice and the other team plays their A++ game, and there you go. That's how losses happen. It has happened before. So I couldn't sit here in good conscience and say Georgia's going to go 12-0 yet again. But I do think that they are better than most everyone on their schedule. And I see my buddy Raj in here who's like, I went from 9-3 to 11-1, sort of. What I meant was Georgia could go 9-3. They could lose to Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss and Tennessee. It could happen for the same reasons I just said. And there are people who are out there talking about, I'm not saying that they are voices necessarily that deserve us to pay attention, but there are people out there who are saying that Georgia's living off of what's happened over, the last 2 or 3 years, and they're not as good. I don't agree with that at all. But there are people who want to say stuff like that. Again, they're not worth our attention. But I was having a little bit of fun when I was like, Georgia's going to go 9-3. I really do think that 11-1 is a good number. I really do believe that they could very easily go 12-0. And I want you all to remember this. If they go 12-0, I'm going to come back on here and say, I said it before the season started that they could go 12-0. It just seems so improbable. I just have too much respect for the conference and the opponents on the schedule to think that Georgia's just going to go out there and walk over everybody. I just think that's not realistic. I'm not saying that if you think they're going undefeated, you're being unrealistic. I'm saying that just to assume it's going to happen is unrealistic. And I can't do that. Again, things just happen. My brain just wouldn't let me predict 12-0. But if they do it, I mean, who's going to stand up? There will be people who will stand up and say, whatever, easy schedule, Mississippi was a fraud, Florida was in shambles, Texas was hurt, and, everybody's going to have some reason if Georgia does go 12-0. Hell, even if they go 11-1, there are going to be people who are going to come in and tell you exactly why that happened, and it's not going to be because Georgia's a good football team. That's going to happen. It happens to every good football team. People blame the schedule, or they blame the referees for benefiting you, or whatever. It's just part of football. Well, it's not part of football, honestly. Let's keep that straight. It's part of insane football fandom, especially when it's on the internet and anonymous. So, But the thing about that, and that's a whole other thing, man, I just feel like, I don't know. I keep thinking there's so many things I want to do. Like, I'm like, I should do a TikTok about this. I should do a short about this. I should do a video about this. And one of those things is just I get that a little trash talk is fine. I'm just not here for it, man. I'm just not a big trash talker. I'm not loud when I watch the games. I'm very quiet because I'm watching the game. I'm not a person who gets in your face and tells you how good my team is. If I tell you my team's good, it's because I'm now prepared to tell you why I think so, and it's like a good argument. I'm not just gonna say something stupid just to be barking at somebody, in an internet chat room or whatever. I don't talk trash in public. It's just not who I am, man. And I don't want this channel to be that either. This is what overtime is. This is me just talking. So if y'all are hanging in here with me, I appreciate it. But it's just I'm just not going to do that. I'm going to be proud of my team. I'm going to point out things that I think are funny about other teams, but I am not a trash talker. I don't like it. I don't appreciate it. I don't enjoy it. And I'm not going to let that be what my channel is. So if you enjoy that kind of stuff, there are a lot of other places you can go and get that. So, that's why I know we don't have to do it here. And I always think about stuff like it's so random. Again, guys, I appreciate you being in here with me. Scotty's in here. What's up, Scotty? I don't know if I said hello before. It's good to see you, buddy. I hope you're doing well. Yeah. So we've got a lot going on, and tomorrow night Joe's going to be back with me. We're going to do, the SEC Powers Hour. We're going to pick all the SEC games this week and probably one or two more. There are a couple of good games over this extended weekend here, this holiday weekend. A couple of good matchups that I have my eye on that we're going to pick. So we're going to have a good time tomorrow night, as we always do on the SEC Powers Hour. So if you haven't checked us out before, I hope you come and hang out with us. We have a good time over there. But if you just can't get free or you're just not interested, that's okay. I appreciate you coming by and hanging out for whatever amount of time you want to come and hang out with us. It's a good time. It is a good time. Yeah. So I'm not seeing any questions or anything in the chat here in particular. I just want you guys to know I appreciate you being here. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday evening. Like I said, we'll be back here tomorrow night, Thursday at 7 p.m. for that SEC Powers Hour, and I am looking forward to it. Until then, I guess we're going to go ahead and put a bow on this. I will talk to you guys on the other side. Y'all take care of yourselves. And until I see you again, go Dogs!